Before the modern world, before nations, before empires, before borders as we know them, there was Rome. From a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River to the most powerful empire the ancient world had ever seen, Rome did not just conquer lands, it reshaped civilization. It built roads that connected continents. It created laws that still influence governments today. It engineered monuments that defy time itself. But how does a village become a superpower? How does a republic become an empire? And how does an empire that ruled for over 1,000 years fall? This is not just the story of battles and emperors. This is the story of ambition, of power, of corruption, of innovation, of survival. This is the story of generals who defied the Senate, of emperors who ruled as gods, of citizens who believed they were eternal. This is the rise, the dominance, and the collapse of the greatest empire in ancient history. Welcome to the Complete Histories. This is the Complete History of Roma. The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. Part 1. Foundations of Power, Geography, Culture, and Early Structure. The story of Rome is not merely the story of conquest. It is the story of how geography, social structure, military organization, political innovation, and psychological identity combined to produce one of the most durable and influential civilizations in human history. To understand the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, we must begin long before emperors, before legions crossed continents, and before marble monuments dominated the Mediterranean world. Rome did not begin as an empire, it began as a geographic advantage. Located in central Italy along the Tiber River, Rome occupied a position that was both defensible and economically strategic. The Italian peninsula itself functioned almost like a natural fortress. The Alps formed a partial northern barrier, slowing invasions from continental Europe. The Apennine mountain range ran along the length of the peninsula, dividing but also protecting regions internally. The surrounding seas connected Italy to trade networks across the Mediterranean. Rome's precise location offered multiple advantages simultaneously. The city was built on 7 hills, providing defensive elevation. The Tiber River enabled trade and transport, while also serving as a natural obstacle against attackers. Unlike coastal cities that were vulnerable to sudden naval assaults, Rome was positioned inland but close enough to benefit from maritime commerce. This geographic positioning meant that Rome had access to trade routes without constant exposure to piracy or invasion. Geography did not guarantee dominance, but it created the conditions for growth without early annihilation. According to Roman tradition, the city was founded in 753 BC by Romulus, who killed his twin brother Remus after a dispute over where the city should be built. While this account is mythological, its symbolic meaning is revealing. Rome's foundational story is rooted in conflict, ambition, and the idea that greatness emerges from struggle. Roman identity from the beginning was associated with strength, endurance, and the acceptance of violence as a tool of destiny. Historically, early Rome was influenced significantly by the civilization of Etruria to the north. The Etruscans were more urbanized and technologically advanced than early Roman settlements. They introduced architectural techniques, religious rituals, symbols of political authority, and urban infrastructure planning. Rome did not resist these influences. Instead, it absorbed them and restructured them according to its own needs. This pattern would define Rome's expansion for centuries, conquest followed by assimilation. In its early monarchical period, Rome was ruled by kings. However, in 509 BC, the Romans expelled their final monarch and established a republic. This transformation was revolutionary in the ancient world. Instead of concentrating power in a single ruler, Rome created a complex system of shared authority. Executive power was held by 2 consuls elected annually. The Senate, composed largely of aristocratic elites, functioned as an advisory body with substantial influence over foreign and financial policy. Popular assemblies allowed citizens to participate in legislation and elections. This system was not democratic in the modern sense. Political power remained concentrated among elite families known as patricians. However, the structure introduced institutional continuity and accountability. Annual elections limited the consolidation of authority. Shared governance reduced the risk of hereditary tyranny. The Roman Republic's political system was not static. It evolved through internal social struggle between patricians and plebeians. Over time, plebeians gained representation and legal protections.
This internal negotiation between social classes contributed to long-term stability. Rome's system did not eliminate conflict, it institutionalized it. This capacity to transform social tension into political reform was a core reason for Rome's resilience. But political innovation alone does not build empires. Military organization does. Rome's military system was among the most significant factors in its rise. Unlike many ancient armies composed of temporary levies, Roman legions developed into professional, disciplined units. Training emphasized cohesion, discipline, and tactical flexibility. Soldiers were equipped in standardized fashion, ensuring uniformity and combat effectiveness. Roman military strength was not based solely on battlefield courage, it relied on logistics. Roads were constructed to move troops rapidly across vast distances. Fortifications were built methodically, supply lines were maintained with precision. Engineering became a weapon. Moreover, Rome implemented a strategic policy toward conquered peoples. Rather than simply enslaving or exterminating defeated populations, Rome often granted partial citizenship or allied status. This expanded Rome's manpower base. Former enemies became soldiers within the Roman system. Over time, this approach turned conquest into integration. By the 3rd century BC, Rome had consolidated control over most of the Italian peninsula. Its next major challenge came from Carthage, a maritime power controlling trade across the western Mediterranean. The conflict between Rome and Carthage resulted in the Punic Wars, prolonged and brutal confrontations that tested Rome's survival. During the Second Punic War, the Carthaginian general Hannibal executed one of the most daring military campaigns in history, crossing the Alps with war elephants and invading Italy itself. Hannibal inflicted devastating defeats on Roman armies at battles such as Cannae. Yet Rome did not surrender. Instead of seeking peace after catastrophic losses, it adopted a strategy of attrition. It avoided direct confrontation with Hannibal when necessary, and instead attacked Carthaginian holdings abroad. Rome's response to crisis reveals a defining characteristic: institutional endurance. Individual armies could be destroyed, generals could be defeated, but the state persisted. The Republic mobilized new forces repeatedly. Eventually, Rome carried the war to North Africa and defeated Carthage decisively in 146 BC, destroying the city completely. With Carthage eliminated, Rome became the dominant power in the Mediterranean basin. However, expansion brought profound transformation. Massive wealth flowed into Rome from conquered territories. Slavery expanded dramatically. Large landowners accumulated enormous estates worked by slaves, displacing small farmers. Economic inequality intensified. Veterans returning from war often found themselves without land or livelihood. At the same time, military reforms gradually shifted loyalty away from the Republic and toward individual commanders. Generals promised land and rewards to soldiers. Armies became personally loyal to their leaders. This shift laid the groundwork for civil war. In the 1st century BC, political competition grew increasingly violent. Reform efforts by leaders such as the Gracchi brothers ended in bloodshed. Political norms eroded. Eventually, one of Rome's most successful generals, Julius Caesar, emerged as a transformative figure. After conquering Gaul, Caesar commanded enormous popularity and military loyalty. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, initiating civil war. His victory led to his appointment as dictator for life. This concentration of power alarmed the Senate. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who claimed they were defending the Republic. Instead of restoring stability, his assassination accelerated collapse. Civil wars resumed. Out of the chaos emerged Augustus, who consolidated power carefully and strategically. In 27 BC, he established the Roman Empire while preserving the appearance of republican institutions. Authority became centralized, but cloaked in tradition. This marked the beginning of a new phase, not the end of Rome, but its transformation. The Republic had risen through shared governance and disciplined expansion. The Empire would rise through centralized authority and administrative sophistication. And yet, embedded within its strength were the seeds of its future fragmentation. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Part 2, the imperial system, power, administration, economy, and the height of Rome. When Augustus consolidated power in 27 BC, Rome did not suddenly abandon its past. Instead, the empire was built as a careful evolution of the Republic. Augustus understood that Rome feared kingship, therefore he avoided overt dictatorship and instead presented himself as princeps, first citizen. Behind this modest title, however, lay near absolute authority. This political transformation marked the beginning of the Principate, the first phase of the Roman Empire. It was a system based not on overt autocracy, but on controlled stability. Augustus restructured the military, reorganized provincial administration, stabilized finances, and initiated a long period of relative peace known as the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana was not the absence of war. Rome continued to expand and suppress revolts, but internally across its core territories, there was remarkable order. Trade flourished, cities grew, infrastructure expanded. For nearly 2 centuries, Rome experienced unprecedented prosperity. One of the key pillars of imperial stability was military reform. Augustus reduced the number of legions but professionalized them. Soldiers now served fixed terms and were paid regular salaries. Upon retirement, veterans received land or financial compensation. This system reduced the likelihood that armies would pledge loyalty to ambitious generals in exchange for promises of reward. The army became, in theory, loyal to the emperor rather than to individual commanders. At At the same time, Augustus created the Praetorian Guard, an elite unit responsible for protecting the emperor. While intended as a stabilizing force, the Praetorian Guard would later become a political weapon, influencing succession and even assassinating emperors. Administratively, the empire was divided into provinces. Some provinces were governed directly by the emperor, others remained under senatorial administration. This dual system balanced tradition with centralized authority. Governance collected taxes, maintained order, and supervised local affairs. Rome did not attempt to micromanage every aspect of provincial life. Instead, it allowed local elites to retain power as long as they remained loyal to Rome. This pragmatic governance strategy helped Rome maintain control over diverse cultures and regions. From Hispania to Syria, local traditions continued under Roman supervision. Cultural assimilation occurred gradually. Latin spread across the western provinces, while Greek remained dominant in the eastern Mediterranean. Rather than forcing uniformity, Rome created unity through law, taxation, and military presence. The legal system became one of Rome's greatest achievements. Roman law evolved into a structured and adaptable body of principles governing property, contracts, citizenship, and criminal justice. The concept that law applied systematically, rather than arbitrarily, contributed to long-term administrative cohesion. Even after the empire's collapse, Roman legal principles would influence European legal systems for centuries. Economically, the empire functioned as an interconnected network. Roads linked cities across thousands of kilometers. Maritime routes connected North Africa, Egypt, and the Levant to Italy. Grain from Egypt fed Rome's massive urban population. Silver from Spain funded imperial expenditures. Trade goods such as silk, spices, glassware, and olive oil circulated widely. However, beneath this prosperity lay structural dependencies. Rome relied heavily on slavery as an economic engine. Conquests provided slaves, who worked in agriculture, mining, and domestic service. Large estates, known as latifundia, displaced small farmers. While profitable for elites, this concentration of land ownership weakened a rural middle class that had once formed the backbone of the Republic. Urbanization also intensified. Rome itself grew into a metropolis of over 1 million people. Maintaining order and feeding such a population required enormous logistical coordination. The grain dole, free or subsidized grain for citizens, became essential for preventing unrest. Public entertainment, including gladiatorial games and chariot races, functioned as social pacification mechanisms. At its territorial height, the empire expanded further under emperors such as Trajan. Trajan extended Roman control into Dacia and briefly into Mesopotamia. Under his rule, Rome reached
Part 6. Macro-historical analysis. Power, systemic limits, and the long shadow of Rome. When we step back and examine Rome not as a sequence of emperors and battles, but as a long-duration system, a deeper pattern emerges. Rome's rise and fall were not accidents of individual leadership. They were the predictable outcomes of structural dynamics that affect large, complex states. Rome was, in essence, a machine of integration. It integrated peoples, it integrated economies, it integrated military structures, it integrated legal systems. For centuries, this integrative capacity allowed Rome to transform conquest into stability. But integration has limits. The larger and more complex the system becomes, the more energy it requires to sustain itself. Rome's long-term trajectory can be understood through 5 structural phases: expansion through flexibility, consolidation through institutions, overextension through scale, rigidity under pressure, fragmentation, and transformation. 1. Expansion through flexibility. During the Republic, Rome was extraordinarily adaptive. It absorbed foreign ideas without losing identity. It granted citizenship strategically. It incorporated defeated enemies into its military system. This flexibility created exponential growth. Conquest produced manpower. Manpower enabled more conquest. Economic gains funded infrastructure. Infrastructure enabled further expansion. The Republic functioned almost like a feedback loop of growth. But growth systems depend on continuous energy input. For Rome, that energy was territorial expansion. When expansion slowed after reaching natural geographic limits, the economic engine changed. No longer fueled by new conquests, Rome had to rely on taxation and internal productivity. The transition from expansion to maintenance is one of the most dangerous moments in any empire's life cycle. 2. Consolidation through institutionalization. Under Augustus, Rome stabilized its growth by institutionalizing authority. The empire replaced competitive aristocratic politics with centralized leadership. This created stability, but it also removed political competition as a safety valve. In the Republic, rivalry was managed through elections and term limits. In the Empire, rivalry often became violent because power was concentrated at the top. As long as emperors were competent and respected, this concentration worked. But when weak rulers emerged, the lack of institutional succession mechanisms became catastrophic. Rome's stability became personality dependent. Systems that depend on exceptional individuals are inherently fragile. 3. Overextension and diminishing returns.
At its peak under Trajan, Rome controlled immense territory. However, each additional frontier required soldiers, roads, fortifications, and administrators. Over time, the marginal cost of defending new territory exceeded its economic benefit. This phenomenon, diminishing returns on complexity, is central to understanding Rome's fall. The empire became so complex that maintaining it consumed most of its resources. When crises struck, plagues, invasions, civil wars, the system lacked reserve capacity. Complex systems collapse not necessarily because they are weak, but because they are too rigid to adapt quickly. 4. The shift from citizen empire to bureaucratic state. In the early republic, Roman identity was tied to civic participation. Citizens served in the military. Political rights were meaningful. There was a shared sense of collective ownership of the state. By late antiquity, Rome had transformed into a highly bureaucratic autocracy. Under reforms initiated by Diocletian, administration expanded dramatically, taxation became more systematic, professions became hereditary, social mobility declined. These reforms were rational responses to crisis, but they also made society less dynamic. Citizenship gradually lost political meaning and became primarily legal status. When civic engagement declines, states rely more heavily on coercion than participation. This shift weakened the emotional bond between population and empire. 5. Migration, not invasion. Traditional narratives describe barbarian invasions as the cause of Rome's fall. However, modern historical analysis shows that these movements were complex migrations triggered by chain reactions across Eurasia. When the Huns moved westward, they displaced Germanic tribes. These tribes sought entry into Roman territory not initially as conquerors but as refugees or federated allies. Rome's failure was not that it faced migration. It had integrated outsiders for centuries. The failure was administrative. Corruption, resource shortages, and mistrust turned manageable migration into armed conflict. In many cases, so-called barbarian kingdoms that replaced Roman authority maintained Roman administrative frameworks. The collapse was political, not civilizational. 6. East versus West, structural divergence. The survival of the Eastern Roman Empire demonstrates that Rome's fall was not inevitable everywhere. The East had greater urban density, stronger trade networks, higher tax revenue, more defensible geography, a powerful capital in Constantinople. The West lacked these buffers. When North Africa fell, the Western Empire lost critical economic support. Without revenue, armies could not be maintained. Without armies, authority dissolved. The East could absorb shocks, the West could not. 7. Rome's transformation into medieval Europe. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not produce immediate darkness. Instead, it initiated transformation. Roman roads continued to be used. Roman law influenced dramatic codes. Latin evolved into Romance languages. The Christian Church preserved literacy and administration. Even political ideas such as empire survived. The concept of a universal Roman authority influenced medieval rulers for centuries. Rome ceased to exist as a centralized Western state, but it became the foundation of European civilization. 8. The deeper lesson. Rome's history reveals a pattern applicable beyond antiquity. Large systems grow through innovation and adaptation. They stabilize through institutions. They overextend through ambition. They become rigid under pressure. They fragment when flexibility disappears. Rome rose because it could integrate diversity without losing cohesion. It fell when integration became too costly and cohesion fractured. Yet Rome's ultimate paradox is this: its political structure collapsed, its cultural and legal legacy became immortal. Few civilizations have shaped the world so profoundly after their political death. We have now built a multi-part, extremely detailed structural narrative of Rome's rise and fall. If you want, I can now expand this into a fully cinematic 3-hour documentary script, turn this into a 20,000-word plus academic manuscript, add detailed battle reconstructions, add economic models and demographic data analysis, or create part 7 focusing exclusively on military evolution across centuries. Tell me the direction and depth you want next.